Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. As you know, Ms. Yanghee Lee, the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar, briefed the General Assembly's Third Committee yesterday afternoon on the human rights situation in Myanmar. She's here today to deliver some opening remarks, and then she'll be happy to take your questions. Please go ahead, Ms. Lee.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming this morning. I'm glad to see you all here. Yesterday, I addressed the Third Committee and highlighted my concerns about the situation of Myanmar and across the whole of Myanmar, and the particularly critical situation in the Rakhine State. I want to start with a note of recognition that earlier this month, Myanmar had ratified the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, although they had a declaration in relation to the right of determination. I really do look forward to the government taking steps towards the achievement of the full realization of the rights in the covenant. Now, this makes Myanmar party to 4 international human rights instruments, the CRC, the CEDAW, CRPD, and now the ICESC. I remain of the view that constitutional reform must proceed to allow for proper operation of the rule of law in Myanmar. In addition, reform of laws that are in contravention of international human rights must be prioritized. I have in the past commended Myanmar for the flourishing and widening and opening up of the democratic space. However, in recent times, it seems to me that national legislation is effectively resulting in the criminalization of the legitimate expression free and legitimate expressions. Reports of violent clashes between the military, the Tatmadaw, and ethnic armed groups continue to affect civilians in Kachin and northern Shan. There are continuing reports of allegations of serious rights violations, as well as decreasing humanitarian access. It is unclear whether Myanmar's peace process has advanced since the signing of the National Ceasefire Agreement 2 years ago. There is widespread of hate speech, particularly that is directed at the Rohingya, which amounts to incitement of hostility and even violence. And for decades, it has been cultivated in the minds of the people in Myanmar that Rohingya are not indigenous to the country and therefore have no rights whatsoever to which they can apparently claim. I have also received consistent reports about incidents of religious intolerance against Christians and Muslims from across the country. I therefore urge the government to use public messaging that embraces the entire makeup of the Myanmar population. Use the recent public show of interfaith alliance and solidarity to combat prejudice and bigotry, and take advantage of the majority in Parliament to strike down laws that are discriminatory to show that all groups in Myanmar have equal rights. My main concern is the current situation of the Rohingya the community and what will happen to them next, in particular about how long it might take for the government to ensure that the conditions for their return would be safe and dignified, as well as they're being able to rebuild their lives. I strongly appealed for accountability, starting with giving access to the fact-finding mission that was established by the Human Rights Council. The crisis in Rakhine State, which has not only been in decades in the making, but has for some time gone beyond Myanmar's border, for a very long time now, this issue has not been simply a domestic affair. I call to the community, international community, to remain seized of the human rights situation in the whole of Myanmar, and not just the situation in Rakhine, given the challenges across the country. And I recommended that the Security Council issue a strong resolution and to have Myanmar as an agenda item. Thank you. And I'm open for questions.
Excuse me. Thanks very much. We'll start here and then there, please.
Ms. Lee, thank you so much for the briefing on behalf of the UN Correspondents Association. We really do appreciate it. My name is Sherwin Bryce-Pease, South African Broadcasting.
Okay.
You say you've called on the Security Council for a resolution. What specifically would you like to see in that resolution? And various senior UN officials have called this ethnic cleansing. Amnesty International has called what's happening to the Rohingya crimes against humanity. We understand the State Department in the United States is reviewing whether they want to use and adopt that term as well. What's your assessment?
Well, as I've said in my report, hundreds of thousands of people do not choose to flee from their homes, to live in dire conditions in camps, unless they are faced with conditions that threaten their basic survival. And I'm very concerned about continuing reports of thousands of people fleeing. So whether it is clearly defined in ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity, I think the most important thing that we need to do is to really focus on what we're going to do. Immediate action is needed. I had called it when last year's October 9th incident happened, and early back in February, I had already called it, it's very close to crimes against humanity. But then, now, there are hallmarks. All of the hallmarks are there for ethnic cleansing, and the High Commissioner has called it a textbook case of ethnic cleansing, but all the hallmarks are there. But we have to decide that down further along the line.
And in terms of resolution, what would you like to see?
Well, I would like to see that the military stops, the security forces stop all kinds of actions, and then the international community, the Security Council, would be able to have this on their agenda, item agenda.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press, on behalf of the Free UN, Coalition for Access. Thanks for the briefing. And I was listening yesterday in the third committee when at least one member asked you whether you thought that the previous mandate of Mr. Nambiar or some kind of a good office's representative from the Secretary General would be a good idea. And I wanted to, I guess, ask you again your reasoning on that, but also whether in your various visits to the country, if you can just say in terms of your own mandate, what your interactions have been with the country team. There's been quite a bit of controversy about whether through time or at different times the country team under Renata Lok-Desalegn may have been trying so hard to kind of work behind the scenes with the government that maybe some access, not only aid access, but even like human rights observing access, or that human rights were downplayed within the country team and people were retaliated against for raising human rights issues. That's what documents have come out. As a human rights special rapporteur on Myanmar, what's your view of that, or what can you say of your interaction with the country team at a minimum, if you can describe that? Thanks.
Okay, that's a very sensitive question for me. Well, let me go back to your first question of Mr. Nambiar, or mandate of a special advisor. That mandate has been existing for a very, very long time. And if I understand it correctly, and if I remember it correctly, it was Mr. Nambiar who proposed that his mandate be finished, that there is no need for another resolution of such, where the country doesn't deserve two human rights resolutions. My work is different from the work of the special advisor, and at this point, if we, as I'm sure you're all familiar, that the international community really doesn't have that much access to the decision makers, let alone to the country. The UN. Neither does the UN have complete access as they used to enjoy before. So maybe reinstating this mandate of a special advisor is a good, I can't judge now if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it may be a necessary thing. But if there is no access and the personality that will be selected, that would be a very important factor in terms of getting access. If you can't get access, what's the use of having a special advisor? That was the main reason to have a special advisor to work on issues that are very sensitive.
Just one quick follow-up, maybe to know whether Ms. Locke-Desselin is leaving at the end of the month, and it seems there's been public reporting that the government hasn't approved a replacement yet, either at the ASG level or at something lower. Are you privy to that at all? Do you think that that's a bad sign of if a replacement is not installed before the person leaves, of even greater distance between the UN system and the government in resolving the issues that you work on?
Well, I'm not privy to the actual details of personnel replacement, but I do know that the government was not agreeing to an ASG level, special resident coordinator. They do not want that extra treatment. And but if the RC is leaving, I know she's leaving at the end of this month, and if they can't get somebody else in as an interim RC or a new RC, and the government doesn't allow that, that might be indicative of their signs, but it doesn't prevent the UN system of appointing somebody who's already there in terms of other UN agencies to work as the ad interim RC for permanently, not as when the RC is out of the country, some of the other UN agency heads will rotate and be ad interim. So I don't think that would be that problematic, but it's the person that would be chosen to go. That I think that would be a very crucial factor that we need to consider. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes,
hi.
thank you very much. Hi, Evelyn Leopold. I was listening to part of your address yesterday. I don't know how you can monitor what's going on if you don't have a fact-finding mission and regular missions going in there, because otherwise it's all secondhand information. And my second question is, what's the influence of, how can one influence China to influence the generals a bit more? I heard their address yesterday, and it was really negotiations and so forth. But they have quite a strong ties with the country.
Yes.
Thirdly, is your full report online? Or?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. My full written report is online, and I believe my oral report is also online too. How can you do an effective monitoring if you don't have the fact-finding mission or consistent periodic monitoring of other parts of the monitoring system? Yes, it's been a very difficult situation where the fact-finding mission could not get to Myanmar. However, I've been able to go for all my requests. I've been able to go in, but I wouldn't say that I was able to go into all the areas that I really need to go. I was really surprised this year in January, after last year's incidents, I was able to go to northern Mongdo and northern Rakhine and visit the villages and talk to villagers without having minders, without having photographers with me, and they were able to accommodate that. I said, "You stay on the roads, on the streets, and I will walk." And I walk through into the villages, and of course, they would have gathering of people already, but I don't know if it was pre-arranged by the authorities or the people themselves thought that, heard that I was coming, so there was a gathering. I would not go to the gatherings first. I would go to the different houses, and I would just, go into houses and talk to people. If there is no access, just as DPRK and Iran, there's never been access into the country. That doesn't deter us from getting information. And as you said, the government will always say, you're hearing, where are you getting your reports from, your sources? But if that's the case, then that's how many of the reports and many of the monitorings worldwide have taken place. And this is why that the third committee has to come up with a very strong statement to accept the fact-finding mission, to allow unfettered access, humanitarian access, human rights access, as well as international media. And this is not only for Rakhine, but throughout other parts of the country, because there has been no access. There has been, for over a year, humanitarian access has been blocked in Kachin and northern Shan. No international monitoring bodies were able to go in. So I think that's something that this GA has to really agree on. And the Security Council, by saying a Security Council resolution, it's the first time that Myanmar will be enjoying a Security Council resolution, and it would be important for a Security Council resolution to really state that all of these the security forces and violence, acts of violence must stop, and all parties must be accounted for. China. Oh yes, thank you, China. China, as you say, has more power than the rest of the world really knows in terms of relations with economic, military relations with Myanmar. Now, the only way is for us to persuade China to use their leverage, because the Chinese have so much invested in Myanmar, and the military China would probably be the only country that the military would be able to entertain any talks about easing off their power. Mm-hmm.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Frank Uciardo. You were part of a seven-person expert panel that earlier talked about credible allegations of human rights violations. And you just talked about all the hallmarks of ethnic cleansing. Can you be specific about those hallmarks? And my other question is, can you talk about the posture of Aung San Suu Kyi? And a lot of people have criticized her for not stepping up to the plate in this scenario and being, taking a stronger position about what's going on in terms of human rights violations.
Well, let me start with the second one. It has really baffled everyone, and it's really baffled me about Daw Sue's position or non-position on this issue. Well, she's come out with a statement in her September 19th statement, her address to the international diplomatic community. And she recently came out with another statement to the domestic community there. She has not ever recognized that there is such people called Rohingya, and I think that's a starting point. And I'm very disappointed that if she could use her moral power and her popularity to reach out to the people and say, hey, these people are suffering, they have suffered a lot, and let's show some humanity, that would have, I think people would follow her because she's adored by the popular, by the public. She's really adored. And if she reaches out and says, you know, this is inhumane, any type of behavior should be stopped, I think that would have put a different turn into how people react. There is so much hatred and hostility against the Rohingyas. And it's really hard to speak about the Rohingyas. The media are not, the domestic media. This is reports that I have to verify this, but some of the media people have been complaining that they are being hassled if they report on the situation of Rakhine. So, in essence, what I'm hearing from people who are living in Myanmar are telling me that the domestic media, there's no coverage of what's going on in Rakhine. Yeah. And the only kind of coverage they get is from the Ministry of Information, the homepage of that, and the spokesperson of the state counselor. But all of those messages are coming from the military media outlets. It's, yeah. And excuse me.
On the other issue, as far as defining the hallmarks
Okay,
of what you know, throughout your sources and the visits, I'm sure, between the time you've been there and what's going on now, you must have seen some sort of trends and some sort of more credible indicators of, say, ethnic cleansing.
Well, there's the Convention on the Prevention of Genocide, which lists all the indicators of genocide. When I first started going in the previous government, U Thein Sein's government, it was after the 2012 communal violence. So these people were all rounded into IDP camps, and they're still there. It was supposed to have been temporary, but they're still there. There's no freedom of movement. There's lack of access to health and no access sometimes to health and education. And the passage of the protection of religion laws, what's really problematic is the birth spacing, that now the law regulates birth spacing. And so these are some of the indicators that can show to crimes against humanity and some of the hallmarks of genocide, not genocide, ethnic cleansing, excuse me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hi, Fox News. Just wondering, given the lack of inaction by the international community, are you worried that this may give space to extremist groups, terrorist groups, such as we've seen on social media, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, exploiting the situation? Is there a worry there? And just second question, what about the role that the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army has played in the violence? Can you tell us a bit about that, please?
Well, 2 years ago, I had already raised that flag that the situation in the Rohingya situation is going to go beyond the borders of Rakhine, and it will become and beyond even the borders of Rakhine into the regional region and beyond. If you consider these decades of discrimination in law and practice and in policy, decades against the Rohingya, and there's no future, there's no livelihood, it's really a ripe ground for any radicalization to occur. And now we have the numbers that have fled recently are about 630,000, and we add that to the last year's October incident, which about 87,000 fled. And then you add the 2012 communal violence, the aftermath of the communal violence. within the past 5 years, people have been re-traumatized and they've seen a lot of violence with nothing changing. Nothing has changed at all in their lives. There's, what else do you have to lose? And so that's why I say it would be a ripe ground for radicalization, especially the victims. I just gave you the number because you have that much more chance of people turning to making really decisions that would have implications on the wider population. Mm-hmm. ARSA, there's, it started from the Rohingya Salvation Organization, or RSO, and then they renamed them or was merged into ARSA. My understanding is that, yes, we know about the leader of the ARSA group. He's not a Rohingya person. He's not a person from Myanmar. And he brought some wealth, and he's trained, and he bought some arms. But if you look at the situation in Myanmar, for decades, and more so since 2012, the freedom of movement is heavily monitored, heavily. You cannot move from one village, one township to another township, not, from one hamlet to another. And since October 9th, there's been a curfew installed in northern Rakhine. So how would you have mass number of people moving and congregating or training? And I've heard that there were hundreds of people training in hills of northern Rakhine. In terms of arms, even that, these are heavily monitored. So my understanding is the ARSA may have arms, but they're not fancy arms. They're homegrown, homemade explosives. Many of them don't even have arms. And as to the number of ARSA, it's really hard to know how many there really is in this ARSA group, or if anybody else is imposturing as an ARSA. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for Ms. Lee before we wrap up?
Okay.
No? Okay, in that case, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Just a reminder, we've got a press conference at 11:15 by the Special Rapporteur on Iran.